I want us to, because we have finished decision theory, and currently we are looking at some of the tools for decision making. And we are looking at linear programming. Looking at linear programming, and today, basically, I intended to do some computations with respect to this linear programming, but with these discussions we've had now with respect to recording and other things, I'm going to only discuss the theoretical aspect of this linear programming today, and then take up the computation, because there is something there is a facility I'm looking for that will help me to write directly on this screen, so that you will be seeing the computation on this screen directly with my notes. So while I do this, I'm saying this because if I do it with my PowerPoint as I have designed it, it will just be like explaining what I have already written. Okay, explaining what I have already written is already on the note. But sometimes it's also good for us to take up one or two examples and solve them, and then you'll be able to understand how to plot the graphical method of linear programming. Okay, so and on that note, please just follow me as we discuss the theoretical concept of this linear programming in respect to decision making. And then we'll now, I trust God, by the time we meet next week, I must have gotten the facility that will enable me to be writing directly on this dashboard, and then instead of using PowerPoint to be typing and doing other things. Okay, so today we're moving into linear programming, and remember we started by telling us that quantitative techniques is all about providing information to the manager to be able to do what? To make relevant decision. Then we now talked about different decision, different situations under which a manager is faced when he's making decision. We talked about the situation of certainty. We talked about uncertainty. We talked about the situation of what? Risk. And then we began by looking at the tools a manager will use to evaluate decision circumstances before taking any decision. If he's faced with what? Uncertainty situations, or if it's faced with what? Decision of what? Under risk, or if he's faced with decision of uncertainty. And then we talked about the issue of deterministic and probabilistic tools. We said that probabilistic tools are used when a manager does not have full information, but he can estimate the probability of a certain outcome. That was what led us to doing expected value, sensitivity analysis, and some other things that we have done previously. Okay, now those ones were done under what? Deterministic and probabilistic models. Now under certainty, whereby we now talk about deterministic model. Deterministic tools are those tools that we use when the manager has information, accurate information about the key decision variables. In other words, he is not assessing the probabilities of any chance of occurrence. He is not assessing the likelihood of any chance of occurrence. He has full and relevant information with respect to the particular decision theory or the particular decision variable that he's working on. And on that note, the manager uses what we call a deterministic. Sorry, let me see what this person wrote. If it is hard to have a comprehensive recording in this software app, most times due to network, as explained by the supporter, suggest all subsequent lectures should be conducted on a platform that supports is sure to have uploaded recording lectures. Please, Nathan, thank you for your comments, but please, subsequent issues with respect to this recording should be directed to the support. Okay, we've spent time enough talking about this recording. Thank you for this, your comments and your suggestion. Okay. Okay, so now when we now talk about a situation, given situation whereby the manager knows have few key a certain decision variables, okay, then we now use a tool that is known as what deterministic tool. And then there are the series of tools that comes under this deterministic tool, among which is what linear programming. And that is what is leading us into this linear programming tool that we are discussing today. Right? Now, in linear programming, there are key characteristics that surrounds linear programming. I'm sure this is an MBA class, and I'm sure this might not be the first time you are doing a course that has linear programming as a topic in it. But it is also important for us to have a better understanding of the concept of this linear programming. It is a tool that is used by management to make decisions under the condition of what? Certainty. I take it again. It is a tool that is available for management to make decisions under the condition of what? Certainty. Why do we say that it is used for the condition of certainty? One, the manager having key information, accurate information about some decision variables. A typical example, you are trying to maximize profit, and your profit maximization is a function of a certain constraints. Those constraints, like the cost implications, the quantity to be produced, and all other information must be available to the manager accurately for the manager to be able to project the profit or maximize profit. Whereby the information about the cost and the quantity to produce is not known, whereby the cost per unit is not known, the manager may not be able to know how to maximize profit or how to minimize cost, depending on the particular objective function that the manager is interested in achieving. Okay? Now, having said that, linear programming centers on achieving two key things. One, maximization function, and two, minimization function. Maximization function. When we say maximization function, we're talking about how a manager will be able to make the maximum profit given a certain constraints. Example, cost, which remain one of the basic constraints to most manufacturing setting, cost of production or cost of doing whatever business you are doing. Now, this tool enables the manager, having identified your constraints, having identified your limitation, and having known what your limitation is. How then do you determine your maximum profit? How to maximize your profit? Then the minimization function now is now talking about, okay, being faced with this kind of situation, how do you ensure that you reduce your costs to the barest minimum such that you will be a cost leader among your peer group in the industry? You will be a cost leader among your peer group in the same product line. You will be a cost leader among your peer group in the same sector that you are operating. And having known that, linear programming will now enable you to know what will be the level of cost to produce to continue to remain a cost leader. What will be the maximum cost per unit that you must reduce the cost of your production so that you will continue to remain a cost leader. This is the two key thing that linear programming helps us to achieve. Now, what are the areas that you can use this linear programming to take decision? One, in the area of portfolio management. In the area of portfolio management, what do we mean by portfolio management? Now, we are talking about a combination of financial instruments. A combination of financial instruments that an investor has invested his resources into. That group of financial instruments where an investor has committed his money is referred to as what? A portfolio. Now, why or how then will linear programming help an investment manager to determine how to set the optimum portfolio? Very simple. The constraint in this case, by the time we begin to do the computation, you will begin to see the constraints and what do we mean by constraint and how these constraints impedes the manager that now results in him using this linear programming to enable him maximize profit. Let's say you have 10 million that you want to invest in common stock and preference stock and dividend and options. Now you have these 5 or 4 key financial instruments that you want to pull into a portfolio. Now, and each of these financial instruments that you are committing this 10 million into, you break this 10 million into these resources. That means the first limitation is this 10 million, because you cannot invest more than what you have. Now, linear programming will now help you to know how to apportion this 10 million across these categories of financial instruments such that you will be able to do what? To make the best out of this 10 million, to get the highest return from this 10 million you are committing. Does it make sense to us? Now, that is how a manager can use linear programming to take decision under what? Portfolio management. You have varieties of financial instruments you want to pull into one portfolio, each with different levels of return and risk associated with it. Linear programming will now help you to streamline and know exactly how to apportion this 10 million across these categories of financial instruments to be able to maximize your profit. Another way you can use financial linear programming in business is in what? In budgetary allocation. In budgetary allocation. Now, if you look at every organization, they release their budget for a particular period, and the budget is designed to accomplish certain objectives. Now, let's say you are a manufacturing sector that has, let's say, 5 product lines, and each of these products that you are producing, you make budgets for each of them depending on the returns that the product line is bringing and the circumstances surrounding the product line. And so to be able to effectively determine how best to apportion the resources you have by way of budgeting, you will need linear programming as a tool. How will it now help you? First of all, you know, in budgeting, you will have to determine what is the cost what is the associated revenue, and what is the whole issue that surrounds this particular product line. And given those circumstances, if you commit, let's say a particular product line has a very minimal return on, or as gross profit margin. It has a very minimal gross profit margin compared to the other, while this other product has a huge gross profit margin but a very minute net profit margin as a result of selling and distribution and other non-operating expenses. Now, all this information will have to be factored in through this linear programming to enable the manager select the best product or allocate the resources effectively and efficiently to each of the product line in order to maximize profit. In other words, if you are releasing the budget and you are spending a huge chunk of your budget on a product line that brings minimal return on investment, then you will end up having a very low return on investment at the end. But if you use this linear programming as a tool, you will be able to apportion your resources according to the product that will bring you the maximum return on your investment. The same thing applies to product mix. What are the combinations of products you must produce to be able to do what? To maximize your profit. These are the key tools that linear programming helps you to do what? To achieve. Now, in linear programming, there are two key things you must, or three things you must be very much conversant with if you must solve any linear programming problem. What are they? One, we have what we call objective function. Two, we have what we call constraints. And three, we have what we call non-negativity constraint. Non-negativity constraint. What do we mean by all this we have been saying? Simple. When you talk about objective function in linear programming is where the manager specifies what he intends to achieve. As a manager who is faced with a particular problem, what actually is the objective? What do you want to achieve from this particular decision situation? This objective is what is captured in the objective function of linear programming. And the objective could be either to make more money or to minimize your expenses. Now, if it is for making more money or for increasing your profitability, then we call it what? The maximization function or a maximization objective. But if it is to minimize the cost of your business, doing business, we now call it what? A minimization objective. Now, you are maximizing subject to what? Constraints. And at the same time, you are also minimizing subject to what? Constraints. What do we mean by subject to constraint? These are limitations, things that will hinder the manager from achieving that objective he has set. Let me use this example. Using this, let's say a company is in producing 5 different products. And each of these products, the company allocates a certain amount of money in each of the products. And the sum total of the returns from each of these products is what gives the company the overall return on their investment, right? Now, the manager's responsibility using this linear programming tool is to, first of all, In each of these product line, identify what are the necessary constraints that if you have estimated that you are going to get so return from a particular product, what would be the likely constraints you are going to face? First of all, since it is a product you manufacture, you will now have to look at the cost of production. It becomes what? A constraint. Why is it a constraint? If you are producing a particular product at a cost that is higher than your selling price, the tendency will be that by the time you finish producing, you will sell and you will not be able to maximize your profit. And so linear programming will now help you to know at what point do you produce so that you make the best of what? Of profit. Now, this is what we refer to as your constraint. What are the cost implications that you must consider before you can now decide the maximum output to produce at this particular cost in order to maximize your profit? Now, we said this whenever we're talking about maximization function, we have what we call a non-negativity constraint. The non-negativity constraint is nothing but is a tool that tries to, a function that tries to let us know that since our objective is to maximize, then we don't have to fall below what? 0.0. Each of these function, each of these objective function cannot come below 0 because our target is to maximize what? Profit. And in every of the linear programming, there is need for you to include this non-negativity constraint. Without non-negativity constraint, without you having this non-negativity constraint, you will not be able to effectively estimate linear programming. Does it make sense? Now, before we just want us to look at one or two computations and then we'll take it up from there. Okay. Let's look at this. Let's look at this particular scenario. I guess you guys are seeing my screen. Like I said, there's a tool I'm working on that will enable me be able to write clearly on this place because I'm using my laptop to do this presentation and I cannot draw effectively using this tool. Okay. What do I do now? Okay, just give me a few minutes. Let me turn on my one or two explanation. Now, in linear programming, like I've said, we have three key equations. First, we have what we call the objective function. We have what we call the objective function. And then we have what we call constraints. And then we now have what we call the non-negativity. We have what we call the non-negativity constraint. Now, each of these key the objective function, the constraint, and the non-negativity constraint is what enables the manager to determine how to achieve the objective that he has set out to achieve. Okay. Now, in each of these, take for instance, let's use a typical example. You have a portfolio of 5 instruments that you want to invest in, and each of these portfolio you have like let's say 300 million that you want to invest in each of these portfolio. And in each of these portfolio, the maximum you can invest in a particular portfolio is like 2 million or 3 million. How do you go about setting this kind of in objective function? Now, you have, since it is a maximization rule, the objective function will be to maximize z subject to what? Subject to the following constraints. Now, what will be your z? Your z will be the objective function, which will now specify, let's say that each of these investments you want to make, x, let us call it x1, will be investment in, or let's use product line. You are producing 5 products, and then x1 is for the first product, or let's just call it p1. And then this P1, the maximum amount you will sell to be able to realize your profit in this P1, let us say it is what? It is 7. It is 7. Then for P2, let us say the maximum price you can sell P2 is what? Is 10. We call it P2. And let us say the maximum price you can sell P3 is 6. So we have P3 equals to 6. Now, this becomes your what? Your objective what? Function. That given each of these products that you have produced, okay, that if you can sell P1 for 7, if you can sell P2 for 10, and sell P3 for 6, and sell P12 P for 12 naira, you will be able to do what? To maximize your profit. Now, this becomes your objective function. What are the things that will now limit you from achieving this objective function? Let us say that each of these products, P1, P2, P3, and P4, okay, that the maximum resources you have to combine to produce P1, P2, and P3, depending on different processes it will have to pass. That P1 will have to go, P1, P2, P3 will have to go through process 1, okay, process 2, and process 3. And there is a maximum amount you must spend in each process before you can now get your product ready for what? For sale. Now, let's call those costs involved in each of the process as your what? Your constraints. Okay, so that we now have what? Your constraints will now be let us say each of your product will be costing, for process 1 it will cost 2 naira for P1, so that we have P1 plus M3 P2 plus 4 P3 and then 6 P4. Now let us take this as our constraint, which will be less than or equals to 1,400, which will be less than or equal to 1,400. Please, I don't know if you are seeing this thing. I think okay, nothing is showing. I've just been talking to myself on this one. So you've not been seeing my screen?
No. We have been seeing, sir. You just ended the screen.
No.
No.
We'll be seeing.
We've been seeing
screen is showing. You just ended it now, and you can share it again.
Okay,
we saw up to the last. Well, maybe it's his network. We saw up to the last thing you typed. Yes.
Okay. Oscar.
We saw up to the total of the constraint.
Okay, that I typed, right?
Yeah, the total of the constraint required.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let me just reshare the screen again so that
Okay.
please, are you seeing it now?
Yes.
If you can see it, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So now, if you have these constraints, right? So the issue with linear programming, because basically for this one, what we'll be doing basically is to teach you how to solve it using graphical method. Okay, we have two approaches to it. We have the graphical method and we have the simplex method. Okay, but for the purpose of this particular class, we'll be focusing on what the graphical method, right? Now, each of these constraints is what will enable you to be able to do what? To plot your graph. And each of the constraint equation, okay, will represent a line in your graph. Now, how then do you go about plotting your graph? You will have to compute each of the equation and then be able to construct your graph. So now let us just use this as this particular equation I have, for instance. But instead of having up to 4 this thing, for simplistic purposes, let us reduce it to 2 so that this computation will be smaller and easier for us. Okay. Now let us say that you have another constraint which is, let's call this one 1P1 plus 7P2 is less than or equals to 2,000. And then let us now have a non-negativity constraint a non-negativity constraint. The non-negativity where P1 must be greater, or you have to specify your linear programming function. Okay. Now, what I did was just more like a sketch for you to understand how it is structured. Now, for this objective function, where you have z is equals to 7p1 plus 10p2. If you determine, let us say that this p1 now will be the quantity you must produce for p1, and this p2 will now be the quantity you must produce for what? For p2. Now, the price, you already know what your price is going to be. That's why I said that this linear programming is for what? Deterministic model. You already know what your price will be. So what we are interested now is, given the constraints that you are facing, how then do you produce a combination of these two products in order to maximize your product given these constraints that is facing you? Now, if whenever you are faced with this kind of issue, you know that some information will be known for certain. What are those information? Can I get a feedback before I continue?
So the screen is in multiple places, like cascades.
Yes, I minimized.
Okay.
What I'm saying, I cannot draw this graph with this PowerPoint I have here. Can we leave the graph so that when I get this joystick by tomorrow, then when I have our next class, I can be able to draw this graph? Or should I project this, even though I need to draw this graph, because in your notes, what was drawn there is totally out of place. Let me show you what I mean. What was drawn in your notes is totally out of place. Like this, I hope you are seeing this one now. This one is okay. This particular graph is okay, but the subsequent one, which is where computations will be, like here, it's not very clear at all. The feasibility region is not showing very clearly. Okay, and then I don't know how I'm going to do it. See, this one is scattered. So, okay, see what I will do. Let me just use this particular graph and explain to you what we'll be doing, and then we'll now do the computation. So now we have three key products here. We have five products here. Let's look at this illustration. He said that a radio manufacturing company makes two different models, model A and model B, which yield unit profit of 2,500 and 4,500 respectively. Now, if you look at this question now, it's already telling you they know the profits that this particular product will yield. That is why it is called what deterministic model. Each of the radio requires a certain amount of time for factoring of component parts and for assembly. Specifically, 1 unit of model A requires 5 hours for what? For manufacturing, and 6 hours for what? For assembling. 1 unit of model B requires 4 hours for manufacturing and 10 hours for what? For assembling. For the coming week, the company has available 400 hours of manufacturing time and 600 hours of assembly. The minimum production requirements are 20 units for model A and 10 units for what? For model B. Now, the question now says formulate this problem as a linear programming model. Using the graphical model, determine the optimum production level and the maximum profit. Now, if you look at the question, they have given you a scenario from which you are going to draw out your objective function, draw out your constraints, and then you now determine your non-negativity constraint. What is the objective function? Our objective function is to maximize the profit of 2 radios. Okay, to maximize the profit of these 2 different radio A and B. Okay, now, and what is our constraint? Our constraint is this labor hours. The labor hours for manufacturing and the labor hours for assembling, which is 600 for assembling and 400 for what? For manufacturing. This is our constraint. Now, and each of these products, product A and B, product A requires 5 hours of manufacturing and 6 hours of what? Assembling. In other words, the maximum hour for manufacturing one product of A is 5 hours. But in manufacturing, by 6 hours in what? In assembling. But for B require 4 hours in assembling and what? 10 hours in what? In 4 hours in manufacturing and 10 hours in assembly. Now, each of these, the manufacturing hours will not be more than what? 400. That is the limitation there. And the assembly will not be more than what? 600. So, to formulate this linear programming model, it will now be 5A plus 10B, which will represent that of what? Which will represent that of manufacturing. And then you now have 5A and 4B, and then you now have 6A and 10Bs for assembly. And each of them must be less than or equals to 400 and less than or equals to what? 600. If you come to this place, this is where it was stated. The maximum profit for product A is 2,500, and the maximum profit for project B is what? 4,500. That's our objective function. We're now looking at how many quantity of A do we produce, given that our maximum profit is already known, and how many quantity of B should we produce, given that our maximum profit is already known, so that we'll be able to maximize this profit, which is our objective function. Now, we need 5 hours of manufacturing time for project A, and we need 4 hours of manufacturing time for project B. and the total number of hours available for manufacturing is 400. In other words, whatever we are producing among these two will not be more than 400 hours for manufacturing. The same thing applicable to this. Whatsoever we are producing for assembling, we have hours of assembling for product A and 10 hours of assembling for product B, and the total hour we spend on both A and B should not be more than 600, because the maximum number of hours available for assembling is 600, right? The same thing, we now say that for A, we cannot take less than what? 20. If you look at the question here, it now said the minimum production requirements are 20 for A and 10 for what? For B. In other words, you cannot produce less than 20 for A and less than 10 for what? For B. That becomes the third constraint. So A should not be less than or equals to what? Should not be greater than, okay, should be greater than or equals to 20. Should be greater than or equals to what? 20. And B should also be greater than or equals to what? 20. The non-negativity constraint is A, B must be what? Greater than 0. That is what we mean by linear programming model. So this you have here now is how to state a linear programming function given this question that was presented before us. Now, it is from here now that you now do the computation, which I said you will be doing it using what? Graphical method. Now, it's very simple. Graphical simplest method is the one that gives headache. Graphical method is very simple and easy. If you plot two axes, that is A and B, okay, it will now represent the two axes. Now, if you take up this equation, convert it to a standard equation by removing this inequality. The same thing applicable to this equation. When you remove it to inequality, what you just do is to begin to solve what? Determine the coordinates, which we did previously in one of our example we did before. Take for instance, if we assume that this 5A plus 4B is less than or equals to 400, what will be the maximum of A? Now, to determine the maximum we can produce with A is to assume that B is 0. So if B is 0, what becomes A? A will now be what? 400 divided by 5, okay, which will give you 400 divided by 5, which will give you 20. Which will give you 80. Now that means the maximum you can produce for A is 80. Now if you assume that A is 0, what will be the maximum you can now produce for what? For B. It will now be 400 divided by what? By 4, which will be 10. So the maximum you can produce for B is 100. 400 divided by 4, which will be 400. Now this is, you will solve this question. Let me okay, from what we have now, if we assume that A is equal to 0, so what it means in this equation is 5 into 0 plus 4B now equals to what? 400. So 5 multiplied by 0 will now give you 0 into 4B plus 4B equals to what? 400. So B is now equals to what? 400 divided by 4, which will be equals to what? 100. So if we assume that B is now equals to what? 0, 5A will now be equals to what? 400. So A will now give you what? 400 divided by what? 5. And this will be equals to what? 80. And for the second equation, what we have is what we have in the second equation is 6 and 10. We have 6A plus 10B is equals to 600, right? Equal to 600. So if we assume that A is 0, if A is 0, then what it means is this will be 6 into 0 plus MB now equals to what? 600. Therefore, 10B is equals to 600. Then B alone will now be equal to what? 600 divided by 10. So that B will be equals to what? 60. And if you assume that B is equals to 0, so what it means is 6A plus 10 into 0 will be equal to what? 600. And 6A will now be equal to what? 600. So that A will now be equal to what? 600 divided by 6, which will be equal to what? 100. So if you look at our coordinates now, for the first equation, when A is equal to 0, B is equals to, when A is equal to 0, B is equals to 100 for our first equation. B is now equals to what? 100. Then for our second equation, when B is 0, when B is equals to 0, then our A is equals to 80. When B is 0, our A is equals to what? 80. Now this is the two coordinates. In other words, the second equation, we can just put it like this. You can put this one like this. At point 0, A is 100. Here, when A is 80, then B is 0. For the second equation, we now have when A is equals to 0, then B is equals to 60. When B is equals to 0, our A is equals to 100. And this thing is the same thing as saying at point 0, you have 60 coordinates. And this one is the same thing as saying at 100, B is 0. Now, with this coordinate we have plotted, you can just fit it into what? Into a graph. Okay, you can fit it into what? Into a graph. Let's see. Now let us say that this is our graph. Let us say that this is our graph. So I hope you guys are seeing this chart. Now at the point, and this graph, let us say that this point is point A and this point is point B. So at the point where A is 0, remember this point is point 0. At the point where A is 0, for the first equation, B is what? B is 100. And at the point where B is 0, A is what? 80. So if you are to plot the equation, it will go like this. So this is the point where A is, at the point where A is 0, B is 100, and at the point where B, let me just shift this. Now the second chart goes this way. At the point where A is 0, B is 60, and at the point where B is 0, A is 100. So you now have another graph that looks like this. Now this point here, this point here is known as what? The feasibility region. Now we've not finished plotting the graph, because they also told us that A cannot be more than what? A cannot be greater than, A can only be greater than or equals to 20, and B also can only be greater than or equals to what? 10. Okay. So if we are to plot these two constraints here, that means at the point where, let us say that this is A axis. So what we'll have here now is at the point where A is what? 20. And then the point where B is 10 will be like this. Now this is a typical example of the charts that you have. I hope you are seeing my screen. Please, can you just indicate if you are seeing my screen? Let me know that. Okay, thank you. So now, if you look at this graph that I have drawn, where do you now consider as your feasibility region? What do you mean by feasibility region? The point at which the manager will be better off, given this constraints and the objective function, is at this place. Let me see if I can. This thing is just okay. I don't think I can paint this place here. Okay, but look at this point here now. Is the visibility region. Okay, this point here is the visibility region at which, whenever the manager remains here, he will be better off in terms of what? Making profit. Now, but this region is not actually the maximum region, because we're talking about maximization of profit. Then how do we maximize profit? Profit can only be maximized at this point, okay, this point here, or this point here, or this point here, or this point here. Remember, we cannot produce less than what? 20. That is this straight bar you are seeing here. Unfortunately, let me see. Okay, this straight line here now is what? Is your line 20, while this one is what? Is 10, which is the B for B axis, meaning that for B you cannot produce anything less than 10, and for A you cannot produce anything less than what? 20. And that is the boundary that we have in this side and this side, giving us a feasibility region of this place now that I am touching the cursor. Now, what do we mean by this feasibility region? That any product you produce in the combination of the two products that aligns in this region, you will make profit. But that does not mean you will maximize profit. You can only maximize profit whereby when you combine the two of them, you get the maximum profit from combining the two of them. Does it make sense? So how then do we combine the two of them? That is the next thing we are going to discuss. Now, you will have to calculate for this point, calculate for this point, and calculate for this point, and for this point. Among these points, whichever one that gives you what? The maximum profit of this point becomes your what? Your optimum level. And that becomes your what? The point that maximizes your what? Your profit. Okay? Now, the next thing now is how then do we determine each of these points? So I'm going to be using a basic simultaneous equation, because each of these things represents what? An equation. Okay? Each of these things represents an equation. What do we mean by it? It represents an equation. Here, we have A is equals to what? 2. Here we have this particular line that is this way is what? B is equals to 10. Now this one that came from this point down to this point is the line that has 6B, 6A plus 10B is equals to 600. That is this line that got to the top here. Now, but this other equation where we have 6A plus, okay, the other one is 5A plus 6 to 400. This is the line that represents that equation. So you see that each of this line, okay, it represents an equation. Okay, so now what we're going to be doing is to solve for each of these points and know from each of these points which one will have the maximum value. If you look at this point, what equations do we have here? We have A is equals to 200, and we have B is equals to what? 10. That is this point here. So if we combine A equals to 10 and B equals to 20, will it give us the maximum profit we are looking for? What is our maximum profit? If you look at the Z equation, what we have as our profit is 2,500 A plus, let me just be sure, 2,500 A plus B. This is our maximization function. Now, what we're now talking about is at this point we have just what? A is equals to 10 and B is equals to what? A is equals to 20 and B is equals to 10. Now, for this other one, how then do we determine the maximum point that we are going to be using? Now, let us see. Please me to call this place. Permit me to call this place. This A and B, the intersection of A and B, call it 1, and this point we call it 2, and this point we call it 3, so that this point we call it what? 4. So that we compute these 4 categories. Already we are not computing anything at this point, because at this point we already know that A is 20, and we already know that B is also what? 10 at this point. So we will need to compute this point here, compute this point here, and this point here, and substitute them in this equation and see the one that will give us the maximum profit. How do we go about doing that? Simple. In that second point, what we have there, if you look at this now, this point is what I'm talking about, and this point represents this equation that we have solved here, where 5a plus 4b is equals to 400. Okay, so now let us use this. Let us use this now. 5a is equal to 5a plus 4b is this, and the second one is that a is equals to what? 20. Now, simple. How do you do? Already you know what a is. A is 20. So how do you now do to determine b? B is substitute 5 into 20 plus 4b equals to what? 400. So that 5 multiplied by 20 will give you 5 times by 20 will give you 100. So you now have 100 plus 4b is equals to what? 400. Okay, so that you now have 4b now be equals to 400 minus 100. Then 4b will now be equals to what? 300. So b alone will be equals to what? 300 divided by 4. Okay, so 300 divided by what? By 4 will give you what? 75. Right? So that becomes your what? Your B. Now, what do we mean by that? What it means is that, let us just say that this point represents this first point here, where we have determined that A is what? 20 and B is 10. So that we just substitute it here and say that A is 20 here, okay, and B is what? Is 10 here. Right? Now let us go to the other quadrant we're working on. Now here we have determined that our A is 20, but our B now is what? 75. Does it make sense to us? So now let us look at the other quadrant, which is this point now. And then this quadrant now comprises of the 2 long equations that we have. Okay, let me just put this long equation here. Now, so this thing is 6a plus 10b is equals to this, and 5a plus 4b. So this is our what? This equation now is this point now, the intersection. These 2 equations is what intersected at this point, and that is what we want to determine. Okay, so now it's simple. We are using what? Simultaneous equation model to do what? To determine A and B. So how do you go about working it out? So let us just multiply. Let's just multiply this by 6. Okay, and then multiply this by what? By 5. I'm sure we know simultaneous equation. It's a simple equation. So now, what do we do? If you multiply this by this, what you now have is 30A plus 4 multiplied by
50.
4 multiplied by 6.
4 times 6. 24.
4 multiplied by 6 will give you 24. So we will now have 24. 24B is equal to 400. 400 multiplied by 6. You now give you what? 2,400. 400. Right? So this becomes what? 30A
30.
plus
50B.
50B. Okay, is equal to what?
3,000.
3,000. So 3,000. So what will happen is that this 30A.
Sorry, you wrote 300.
So, yes. It's 1,000. So what will happen is that this will go out. 30A and 30A will disappear. Will now have what? So this, let's say this is 0 plus
50.
minus, okay, it should be minus 20,
Minus 26.
minus 26B
And minus
is equals
600.
to minus what?
600.
Minus 600. So that B alone,
B
will now be equal to what? 600 divided by 26.
23.
26 will give you what? Approximately 23. So you now have what? Our B is now what? 23. So now how do we now find our A? It's just to substitute this in any of those equations there. So let us say that our 5A plus 4 into what? 23 is now equal to what? 400, right? So 23 by 4,
92.
23 by 4 will give you 92. So you have 5A plus 92 equals to what? 400,
100.
right? So that it will now be 5A. 5A is now equals to what? 400
400 minus 92.
92. So that
308.
5A will now be equals to
308.
That A alone will now be 308 divided by 5.
Approximately 62.
So we have approximately 62. So that A becomes what? So here we have determined our A to be what? 62 and our B to be what? 23.
23.
Right? So now the next point here is this point here. That's the next point here. Now, how do we now determine this point here? If you look at the intersection of this point here is where B is 10 and then where 6A. So we have 6A plus. So this is the equation. B is equals to what? 10. Now here you don't need much, but to just substitute a B in that first equation so that you now have what? 6A plus 10 into what? Into 10 is equals to what? 600. So that 6A will now be equals to what? This will be
100.
10 times 10 is equal to 100. So that I have 600 minus 100. So that 6A will now be equals to what? 500. So that A will now be equals to what? 500 divided by 6. So that A will now be equals to what?
83. 83.
That A will be equals to what? 83. So now, if you look at this, let us use this one now. And so here, our A is what? 83. And here our B is what? 10. Right? So if you compute this out, whichever one that gives you the maximum, starting from this one now, 2,500 multiplied by 20 plus 4,500 multiplied by 10. You go to the next one, 2,500 multiplied by 20 plus 4,500 multiplied by 75. The next one, 2,500 multiplied by 62 plus 4,500 multiplied by 23. And the last one, which is 2,500 multiplied by 83 plus 4,500 multiplied by 10. Now, whichever one is the highest will now give you what? The optimum level or the optimum solution. We call it the optimal solution. In other words, that will be the maximum combination of A and B that will give you the highest what? Profit. And this is just how to do the what? The graphical method using graph. Let's just determine what will be the what? The maximum this thing. Here is 2,500 multiplied by 20 will give you 50,000. Okay. Plus 4,500 multiplied by 10. So what we have here is what? This will be equals to what? 95,000. And the next one, this will be 2,500 multiplied by 20 plus 4,500 multiplied by 75. Multiplied by 75. This will give you 387,500. And the next one, which will be 2,500 multiplied by, please, if you can confirm these figures, that will make more sense, plus 4,500 multiplied by 20. This will give you 200, and this will be equal to 258,500. And the last one, which will be 2,500 multiplied by 83 plus 4,500 multiplied by 10. This will give you 252,500. Now, if you look at the figures, this is the last one. So if you look, this one is 252,500. This one is 258,500, and this one is 387,500, and this one is 95,000. Now, the one that gave us the optimum this thing is 387,500. And what is in this graph? What is the intersection? At what point are we talking about? This is the point here. This is the point that gave us the maximum what? the maximum profit. Okay, if you look at itself, you can see that it's still higher above every other point. So this is the point that gave us the maximum, and we call this point the optimal solution. What does this mean? This simply means that at this point, we are going to have produced 75 units of what? Of B, and 20 units of what? A. That is what it simply means. Produce 75 units of what? B, and 20 units of what? A. With these two combinations, we are going to get the maximum what? The maximum profit. That is what we mean by this feasibility what? Region. Anywhere you produce, if you look at it now, all these points were giving us profit. But the profit we're getting in all these points were not as much as the one we're getting at this optimum solution level. Does it make sense to us? So now that is why we say that this linear programming is a tool that helps us to take decision. Now this feasibility region, please note, I have just shown you how the computations, what we did to calculate this feasibility region. In your material, the thing was not showing very clearly, and there was no computation as to how these points were determined. So please, I believe that this computation, I don't know how we're going to do it now. Whether is there anybody that have question with this computation? Let me just remove the screen and see what you have. Question with this computation. Any question? Okay, I guess everybody is okay. Can I get a response? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so let's just look at one more illustration of this programming, then and we'll close for today. We'll just take one more illustration, then I'll just show you how you can use it to plot your graph and determine your optimum profit, and then we'll close for today. Then I think this illustration I also got to consider is also in your material. Then when we come back next class, we'll now take illustration from other sources that will be conversant with all the things that we're discussing. Okay. Now when you have this linear programming, yes, I'm coming. I hope you see my screen now. Let us take the second. Getting 20. Getting a log into. Now let's just solve this particular illustration. Please, are you guys following me? Guys, there? Are you there? Please. Okay. Okay. So we have to. Someone is saying we have to end here. Okay. Okay. No problem. Do we finish? Tomorrow is work. I agree with you. Okay. It's okay, no problem. So I think well, there's no problem. This second illustration is in your notes. So please just find time and go through that second illustration and other illustrations, so that when we come back next week, I'll take one or two illustrations from other sources, and then we'll just end this issue of linear programming and move on to the next thing. So I'll say thank you for your time for today. Your your comfort and your interest is my concern. So today it's been a wonderful time having you guys. Thank you for your time.